The articulation of accountability following harm inflicted upon oneself or one's family members presents a fundamental tension within systems of justice. Individuals naturally seek to convey the gravity of the injury sustained and the expectation of consequences for the perpetrator, yet such expressions must remain confined to mechanisms that uphold legal standards of permissible speech. This necessity arises from the recognition that unchecked or imprecise language can transform a legitimate grievance into a form that undermines social order and invites legal repercussions. The discourse around familial harm therefore demands careful construction, where the desire for resolution is channeled exclusively through established processes designed to ensure fairness and evidence-based outcomes. Central to this dynamic is the requirement that any statement of resolve emphasize lawful avenues such as civil claims, judicial review, and cooperation with authorities. When harm has occurred, the injured party possesses the right to pursue remedies that address damages and deter future misconduct, but this right extends only to actions grounded in provable facts and individual responsibility. Broad declarations that extend beyond these boundaries risk misinterpretation as personal directives rather than invocations of institutional authority. The framework thus prioritizes clarity, specificity to legal mechanisms, and avoidance of any implication that extends liability arbitrarily or emotionally. Ultimately, the effective communication of accountability serves both the individual seeking justice and the broader societal interest in preventing escalation. By adhering to process-oriented formulations, expressions maintain their legitimacy while contributing to orderly dispute resolution. This approach not only protects the speaker from unintended legal exposure, but also reinforces the integrity of the justice system itself, ensuring that grievances are addressed through deliberation rather than confrontation. The following analysis examines the parameters that govern such discourse, illuminating the precise boundaries that separate protected assertions of rights from impermissible overreach. The demand for accountability in cases of familial injury. When harm befalls a family member, the affected individuals experience a profound disruption that extends beyond the immediate victim to encompass the entire familial unit. This collective impact generates a compelling imperative to articulate the need for redress, as the injury represents not merely an isolated incident but a violation of relational and protective bonds. Accountability in such contexts functions as a mechanism to restore equilibrium, compelling the responsible party to confront the full extent of the consequences through structured legal means. The demand for such accountability arises directly from the harm itself, positioning the injured family as entitled to pursue remedies that acknowledge the depth of the damage inflicted. Expressions of this demand must therefore originate from a factual foundation that identifies the specific harm and links it to the actions of the perpetrator. The focus remains on the causal relationship between the conduct and the resulting injury, thereby establishing a clear basis for seeking compensation or other forms of relief. Such statements serve to document the grievance while signaling an intent to engage formal institutions rather than private resolution. This framing transforms raw emotional response into a measured assertion of rights, preserving the legitimacy of the claim within the justice system. The pursuit of accountability ultimately reinforces the principle that familial harm carries measurable repercussions enforceable through impartial adjudication. By confining the demand to legal channels, the process ensures that outcomes derive from evidence and precedent rather than subjective impulses. This structured approach not only addresses the immediate wrong but also contributes to the prevention of similar harms by demonstrating the system's capacity to deliver consistent results. In this manner, accountability discourse upholds both individual dignity and collective stability within the framework of established legal norms. The distinction between protected expressions of resolve and unprotected threats. Protected expressions of resolve distinguish themselves through their explicit orientation toward lawful processes and evidence-based accountability. Such statements articulate an intention to engage courts, file complaints, or seek judicial remedies without venturing into territory that suggests personal or extralegal action. The distinction rests on the presence of clear references to institutional mechanisms, which signal that the speaker defers to established authority rather than assuming the role of enforcer. This orientation renders the communication compatible with principles that safeguard free expression while maintaining public safety. Unprotected threats emerge when language conveys a serious expression of intent to inflict unlawful harm, particularly when directed at specific individuals in the context of an existing grievance. Specificity regarding family members or anticipated negative outcomes heightens the perception of risk, as does any formulation that implies reciprocity or future confrontation outside legal bounds. The evaluation considers the totality of circumstances, including the personal nature of the dispute and the potential for the recipient to experience fear. Statements lacking anchors in lawful remedies thus cross into unprotected territory by prioritizing emotional retaliation over procedural justice. The boundary between these categories underscores the necessity of precision in language to preserve expressive rights. When resolve is framed as a commitment to legal avenues, it retains full protection and advances the legitimate interests of the injured party. Deviation from this standard, however, exposes the speaker to scrutiny and potential sanctions, as the law prioritizes the prevention of fear and disorder. This distinction, therefore, serves as a foundational safeguard, guiding individuals toward formulations that uphold both personal rights and systemic integrity. The perils of veiled, conditional, and indirect communicative forms. Veiled constructions introduce significant peril by masking potential intent beneath seemingly benign or conditional phrasing. Formulations that express hope regarding the future well-being of a named family member, or that juxtapose acknowledgement of harm with references to alternative historical or existential scenarios, can reasonably be interpreted as conveying an underlying warning. The conditional structure links the original injury to possible adverse outcomes, thereby placing the recipient in a state of apprehension even when literal words appear neutral or positive. Such language undermines the clarity required for protected speech by inviting misinterpretation in the context of familial conflict. Indirect references to non-legal handling of grievances further compound these risks, as they evoke frameworks outside contemporary judicial norms. Mentions of eras characterized by direct retaliation or afterlife reckonings, when connected to current harm, suggest dissatisfaction with lawful processes and a preference for alternative forms of resolution. This implication, however subtle, shifts the communication from assertion of rights to expression of frustration that may be perceived as intimidation. The peril lies in the capacity of such phrasing to erode trust in institutional remedies while amplifying emotional tension. The cumulative effect of veiled and indirect forms erodes the foundation of protected discourse by introducing ambiguity that the law interprets through the lens of reasonable perception. Even when intended as philosophical reflection or rhetorical emphasis, these constructions fail to anchor themselves in evidence-based legal steps. The result is an increased likelihood of legal exposure for the speaker and diminished efficacy in achieving genuine accountability. Avoidance of such forms therefore emerges as essential to maintaining the integrity of any communication concerning familial harm. Principles for constructing lawfully protected communications. Lawfully protected communications adhere to principles of factual precision and explicit linkage to judicial processes. Statements that identify the harm, reference the responsible parties based on evidence of involvement, and announce pursuit of civil remedies or investigations exemplify this approach. By centering the discourse on courts, demand letters, and cooperation with authorities, such formulations eliminate ambiguity and affirm deference to established procedures. This construction not only documents the grievance but also demonstrates a commitment to orderly resolution. Additional safeguards include limiting references to family members solely to those with demonstrable legal liability, such as direct participation or, in the case of minors, limited parental responsibility under applicable statutes. These exceptions remain narrowly defined, with monetary caps and requirements of individual fault preventing any generalization to uninvolved relatives. The principle of individual accountability thus governs the scope of permissible statements, ensuring that expressions remain tethered to provable connections rather than relational proximity. Consultation with legal professionals and the use of formally drafted communications further strengthen protected status. Attorney-prepared demand letters provide a vehicle for asserting rights with maximal clarity and minimal risk, while reports to law enforcement address any criminal dimensions of the harm. These steps transform personal resolve into institutional action, reinforcing the principle that effective accountability arises through systematic rather than spontaneous expression. Adherence to these principles equips individuals to convey the seriousness of familial injury while remaining fully compliant with legal standards. Contextual variations in legal frameworks governing speech. Legal frameworks governing speech exhibit variation across temporal and cultural contexts, influencing the permissible scope of accountability discourse. In certain historical periods, communal norms tolerated more direct expressions of familial retaliation as integral to honor and deterrence. Contemporary systems, by contrast, impose stricter boundaries to prioritize prevention of fear and escalation, reflecting evolving priorities around individual rights and institutional authority. These shifts demonstrate that standards of protected expression adapt to prevailing societal values and institutional capacities. Geographic and cultural differences further modulate these boundaries, with some frameworks extending broader latitude to collective or emotional speech while others constrain it more rigorously to maintain public order. The emphasis on evidence-based processes in certain jurisdictions contrasts with approaches that integrate communal mediation or informal resolution. Such variations underscore the contextual nature of speech protections, where the same formulation may carry different implications depending on the prevailing legal culture. Nonverbal elements, including tone and eye contact, interact with these frameworks by contributing to overall interpretation without independently conferring protection. When words remain anchored in lawful processes, such elements may intensify perceived seriousness. However, they cannot salvage formulations that otherwise suggest unlawful intent. The interplay between verbal content and contextual factors therefore requires consistent adherence to precise language across all settings, ensuring that expressions of accountability retain legitimacy regardless of external variations. Conclusion: legal limits on expressing accountability. The pursuit of accountability for familial harm demands unwavering fidelity to legal boundaries that distinguish protected expression from impermissible overreach. Through process-oriented language grounded in evidence and judicial mechanisms, individuals can articulate the full weight of the injury while advancing legitimate claims for redress. This disciplined approach not only mitigates personal risk but also strengthens the justice system by channeling grievances into constructive pathways. Recognition of the perils inherent in veiled or indirect forms reinforces the value of clarity and restraint. By eschewing conditional phrasing, historical allusions, or references to non-legal reckonings, communications preserve their integrity and effectiveness. The result is discourse that honors the harm suffered without compromising the principles of fairness and due process. Ultimately, the frameworks governing such expression reflect a commitment to balancing individual resolve with collective security. As legal standards evolve and cultural contexts shift, the core imperative remains the transformation of personal grievance into structured action. This orientation ensures that accountability serves justice rather than perpetuating conflict, fostering outcomes that restore equilibrium while upholding the rule of law.